So, are you ready for this one? We are diving into Samuel Tuominen's book, To Whom the Majesty of Kingship Has Not Been Conferred, the Antichrist Revealed.
Oh, this one. Yeah, I remember you sharing this.
You know, I had to bring this one to you.
Yeah, this is going to be good.
It's a wild ride, and honestly, just when you think you've heard it all,
Right.
someone like Tuominen comes along and you're like, wait, what?
It makes you rethink things, for sure.
It really does. So
Yeah.
basically, Tuominen takes this blend of biblical interpretations, history, you know, a little bit of royal watching. It's like a strange brew.
It's fascinating how he tries to weave all these different elements together.
Right. And the real kicker, the centerpiece of his whole argument, is that he suggests King Charles III, King Charles, might actually be the Antichrist.
What?
I mean, talk about a bold claim.
Right. But here's the thing. This book was published back in May of 2022 when Charles was still the Prince of Wales.
So he's not looking back, he's making a prediction.
Exactly. Tuominen is putting it out there. So he starts off in chapter 2 by really digging into this whole idea of the rapture.
Okay.
And he aligns himself with the pre-tribulation rapture theory, which I know is something that you've talked about before.
Right.
So this idea that the faithful are going to be taken away, you know, before things on earth really hit the fan.
Yeah, the classic beam me up, Scotty scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's where Tuominen takes a bit of a turn.
Okay.
He doesn't follow that traditional interpretation that we won't know who the Antichrist is until after the rapture happens.
Right, he diverges there.
He really does.
Most people who hold that pre-tribulation view would say,
Exactly.
we're not going to know who it is.
And he points to 2 Thessalonians 2.3 and Revelation 7
Big ones.
to argue that the church, the people, they will know
They'll know beforehand.
beforehand.
That's interesting.
So, like, we'd be able to point to someone and be like, yep, that's the one.
Well, according to Tuominen, yeah.
Yeah, wild, right?
It is.
So how does he explain that?
Well, he has a very unique interpretation of the great multitude you see in Revelation 7.
Okay.
He doesn't see it as this separate group showing up after the rapture.
Okay.
He believes that is the raptured church.
So he's connecting it directly to the rapture.
Yes.
That's a pretty different take on that passage.
It is a less common interpretation, for sure.
It feels like he's suggesting there's going to be this whole period of awareness where people will have the knowledge
Yes.
to actually make that identification. Like, it's not going to be hidden.
And that's a key part of his argument,
Right.
that this knowledge will be available for those who are actively seeking it.
So it's like he's saying, don't just sit back and wait for things to happen. You need to be actively engaged. Do your homework.
He's urging people to be proactive.
And that leads us right into chapter 3 and Tuominen's portrayal of then Prince Charles.
Okay, let's get into it.
He calls him the Machiavellian Charles. Right. And he really paints this picture of Charles as this master strategist, someone operating behind the scenes, pulling the strings, so to speak.
Right.
He even brings up verses like Daniel 8.23 and 11.21
Oh, wow.
that describe the Antichrist as insolent and, you know, skilled in intrigue.
Interesting choices.
So it's like he's taking that image of Charles, right, the environmentally conscious prince, and contrasting it with this more cunning, almost ruthless figure.
He's definitely playing with those public perceptions of Charles.
So when we say Machiavellian, is that always a negative trait, or can it be a positive thing? I mean, especially when we're talking about leadership, you know?
That's a great question, and it's something that's debated, you know, I mean, like, is it inherently a bad thing?
Right.
But generally, when we say Machiavellian, we are talking about someone who's willing to prioritize practicality over morality, especially in the political sphere,
So they're willing to bend the rules a little bit
to get things done.
to achieve those goals.
And that's really what Tuominen is suggesting about Charles, that maybe he's comfortable using tactics that others might shy away from.
Which, if we're looking at it through the lens of this whole biblical prophecy thing, that could be interpreted as evidence to support his claim.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we're already starting to see how he's building this argument.
He's laying the groundwork.
He is. And to further kind of bolster his argument, he brings in sources like Tom Bauer's biography, Rebel Prince.
Oh, yeah, that one's a doozy.
Which, let's be honest, it paints a very unflattering picture of Charles.
It doesn't hold back.
No, Bauer doesn't pull any punches. He really describes him as this ruthless, power-hungry figure.
Right.
Not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think future king.
No, not the benevolent ruler
No.
image that people might have.
It seems like Tuominen is trying to dismantle that public persona and really expose this this more calculating side to Charles.
He's looking beyond the surface, trying to dig up clues that support his theory.
And then things take even a darker turn when he brings up Princess Diana's documented fears about Charles.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, this is where it gets really heavy.
Right.
We're talking about potential conspiracies within the royal family.
Which is always a captivating topic, let's be honest.
Right. I mean, who doesn't love a good royal scandal?
Right.
But this is serious stuff.
It is, yeah.
Diana, in letters and recordings, expressed this deep concern about Charles allegedly plotting to stage her death in a car accident.
Wow.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is a lot. And Tuominen really goes there. I mean, he doesn't just mention these fears in passing. He digs into the supposed evidence, the rumors of a conspiracy, all the historical context that might have fueled Diana's anxieties.
It wasn't clear to Diana what her husband knew about her relationship with her bodyguard. But after Manaki was moved from protecting Diana and dismissed from royal service a few months later, Diana got the shock of her life. While she was riding in a limousine with Charles on the way to a premiere at the 1987 Cannes Film Festival, he turned to her to tell her about an incident the previous night involving Barry Manaki. Charles was casual, but to Diana, the news was an unbelievable bombshell.
And Charles said to me that he was killed in a motorbike accident, and that was the biggest blow of my life, I must say. That was a real killer.
Diana said revealing the news in such a casual way on such a formal occasion was a particularly cruel and callous move by her husband. Diana said her devastating emotional pain over the loss was soon followed by suspicion, and then she said something even more extraordinary.
I think he was bumped off. But there we are, I'll never know.
She did say something that you didn't follow up on, and I'm wondering why you didn't. She said that she thought that Barry Manaki was bumped off.
Mm-hmm. I didn't get the feeling that she fundamentally believed that he'd been bumped off. She had a doubt. She wished that people would talk about it. It was more about somebody close to her being taken away.
But Diana apparently couldn't shake off the nagging doubt, even though she'd already been told her suspicion was probably unfounded. The year before she sat down with Peter Sedlin, Diana had asked Andrew Morton to investigate Manaki's death.
She always felt that some unseen forces had engineered that death.
Knowing what you do about eschatology, about biblical prophecy, do you think it's fair for Tuominen to use these kinds of claims, especially considering how sensitive they are? There's no concrete proof. Is this really a valid way to build an argument?
That's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you have these really serious allegations being made, and there's no hard evidence, right? But on the other hand, Tuominen's looking at this through the lens of prophecy and interpretations can be so subjective.
It's not like he's presenting evidence for a trial or anything.
Exactly.
More like he's building an argument based on his understanding of history and how he interprets these biblical prophecies.
Right, and that actually leads us to another pretty controversial part of his argument in Chapter 4.
Okay, what's he got for us now?
Well, Tuominen points to Daniel 11.37. It's a verse that some people interpret as suggesting that the Antichrist might be homosexual.
Okay.
And he tries to connect that to Prince Charles.
Wow, he's really going there, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty bold claim.
Yeah, it's definitely wading into some really personal territory.
No kidding.
I mean, he even brings up those rumors that have circulated about Charles's sexuality for years, and that kind of off-color joke Charles made once about going gay.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole scandal with those allegations of sexual misconduct within the royal household.
Right, the Michael Fawcett and George Smith situation.
Exactly. Can you remind us what happened there again?
Yeah, so basically you had a royal valet, George Smith, who accused Michael Fawcett, who's a close aide to Prince Charles, of raping him.
Oh, wow.
And Smith also claimed that he had witnessed this intimate encounter between Charles and Fawcett.
So a very serious accusation.
Very serious. But then Smith withdrew the allegations.
Oh, really?
He did. But he claimed that he'd been pressured to do it and that the allegations were actually true.
So it's like this whole tangled web of claims and counterclaims.
It's messy, right. And it was never really fully resolved.
So where does Tuominen go with all of this?
Well, he presents it as potential evidence for his interpretation of that verse in Daniel 11.37. He suggests that maybe these rumors and these allegations, whether they're true or not, might reveal something about Charles's character.
But isn't it dangerous to make assumptions about someone's character based on rumors and allegations? Especially when you're talking about something as personal as someone's sexuality.
Absolutely. And to be fair to Tuominen, he does acknowledge that these rumors might be totally unfounded. It's not like he's saying this is definitely the truth, right?
Right.
He's just putting it out there as another piece of the puzzle as he's building his case.
So he's not saying this is fact. He's saying, hey, look at this. What do you think?
Exactly. He wants you to look at all these different pieces of information, these little details, and then see if maybe you can connect the dots yourself.
It's like he's inviting us to play detective with him.
Exactly. He wants you to engage, to ask questions, and to come to your own conclusions.
He's not trying to force his interpretation on you. He's just laying out his thought process and saying, come along for the ride.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really valuable part of his book.
Okay.
Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, he's challenging you to think critically about this stuff, especially about powerful people.
Don't just take things at face value.
Yeah.
Right? Dig a little deeper.
Exactly. Ask those tough questions.
Okay, so we've got this picture emerging of Charles as this Machiavellian strategist, potentially mixed up in conspiracies. It's a lot. And I'm sure some people listening are thinking, wait, is there more?
There is a little more, and this is where Tuominen really goes for it. He brings up Charles's relationship with Jimmy Savile.
Oh, boy. Jimmy Savile. Okay, so for those who don't know, and I can't believe there are many, but just in case, Jimmy Savile was a big-time British TV personality back in the day, but after he died, it came out that he was a serial sexual abuser.
Yeah, a really horrific case that shocked the UK. It really exposed this dark side of fame and power.
So why does Tuominen bring up Savile? How does this fit into everything?
Well, Charles actually knew Savile. They were more than acquaintances. They were friends.
That's right.
Yeah, and pretty close friends, according to some reports. Charles even apparently went to Seville for advice on personal matters.
That's a pretty damning association, considering what we know now about Savile's crimes.
Right. I mean, it's not a good look. And Tuominen uses this to further his point that Charles might have this hidden dark side.
So he's basically drawing a parallel between the two of them.
Yeah, suggesting that Charles was willing to overlook these really horrible things, these accusations about Savile, maybe to protect the image of the royal family.
That's a huge claim to make.
It is. He's implying that there's more to Charles than meets the eye, that maybe he's capable of some pretty awful things.
So to be clear, he doesn't have any hard proof that Charles knew about Savile's crimes.
No, he doesn't. It's more of an implied connection.
He's connecting the dots based on their relationship.
Exactly.
So he's painted this picture of Charles, a Machiavellian strategist, maybe involved in some shady stuff, connected to a known sexual predator. I mean, it's a lot to digest, right? It makes you wonder what's really going on.
It definitely makes you think. And while we have to remember that Tuominen's book is based on his interpretations of prophecy and not hard evidence, it does raise some really interesting questions about power, about morality, about good and evil, and where those lines get blurred.
I mean, it's definitely a lot to take in. Tuominen really doesn't hold back, does he? He paints a pretty dark picture of Charles.
He does, and it's not just about Charles's actions, right? It's like Tuominen's trying to get at something bigger here, something about power itself and how it can corrupt even those who seem untouchable.
Yeah, like those in positions of authority, we tend to put them on a pedestal.
Right, and I think that's what he's warning us about.
Okay.
Don't just blindly trust authority figures just because of their position. Look behind the curtain, right? Like, question those narratives we're told and always consider that things might not be what they seem.
So don't just accept the official story. Do your own digging, your own research.
Exactly.
And that's where, like, a deep dive like this is where it gets really valuable.
Right.
It's not just about saying, oh, I agree with Tuominen or I totally disagree with him.
Yeah.
It's about, okay, let's use this as a jumping off point. Let's use this to really explore these ideas, to think critically,
Right, like he's giving you permission to question these things.
Exactly.
To think for yourself and come to your own conclusions.
So after all of this, after going through all the twists and turns of Tuominen's book, what would you say is the biggest takeaway? What do you want our listeners to really walk away with after this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that knowledge is power. right? Like being able to look at information, especially information about powerful people, and analyze it, to question your own assumptions, to form your own opinions. That's so important, especially in today's world.
It's like he's giving us the tools to be more aware, to not just accept everything we're told.
Exactly. And to realize that things are rarely black and white. There are always different perspectives, different interpretations, and sometimes you're left with more questions than answers.
And on that note, I think we'll leave it there. We've covered a lot today. We've gone deep into Tuoman's take on biblical prophecy, his claims about King Charles, all the evidence, or I guess you could say interpretations of events that he uses to build his case. It's certainly given us all a lot to think about.
It has been a wild ride.
If you're interested in this kind of stuff, definitely check out Tuoman's book, To Whom the Majesty of Kingship Has Not Been Conferred, the Antichrist Revealed. It's a fascinating read, even if you don't agree with everything he says. And as always, do your own research, come to your own conclusions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of biblical prophecy and royal intrigue. Until next time.